Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your location. My name is Lorenzo Chilcangrandi, and I am the founding director of the City Diplomacy Lab. I'm happy to welcome you to today's peer learning webinar on fostering inclusive nature-based solutions for low-income urban communities. This is the second episode of the Urban Innovation to Achieve Just and Sustainable Cities series, consisting of 5 webinars co-organized by GIZ on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and Cities Alliance. This episode is co-organized in partnership with ICLEI and ICLEI Africa with the support of UN Habitat, Slum Dwellers International, the Center for Affordable Housing Finance, the African Union for Housing Finance, and the City Diplomacy Lab. The series goal is to create a roadmap towards the World Urban Forum in November 2024 in Cairo. The focus of this session will be on the impact of nature-based solutions on low-income communities. And our goal today is particularly ambitious. And for this, we will have the precious support of a panel of globally renowned experts and practitioners, which I will introduce in a moment. This goal is to reverse the downward spiral we observe in relationship between urban communities and natural ecosystem. In cities, we witness the most disastrous impact of human-induced climate change. Moreover, that is exceptionally unfair because it hits with particular distraction the urban communities that have contributed least to this dynamic, namely cities in the global south and within them, low-income communities. But this grim realization will only be the starting point for us. We will explore practical ways of addressing both climate and social challenges through the powerful tool of nature-based participatory solutions. We will examine together what the results of this approach have been in different contexts around the world and how to further develop its potential while respecting the local specificities, rights, and well-being of all urban residents. But before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. The session, as you have heard, is recorded, and the recording will be made available online later. Professional closed captioning in French and Spanish is available through the links in the chat. And this is a highly participatory webinar. You will soon be invited to interact with us through the online platform called Slido. The link will be provided in the chat and via the slides. But before moving to today's panel, I am pleased to leave the floor to Anna Ehringer for her opening remarks on today's topic. Anna is a German architect focusing on the use of natural building materials. She is also an honorary professor of the UNESCO Chair of Earth and Architecture, Building Culture, and Sustainable Development. For her, architecture is a tool to improve life, trusting in existing, readily available resources instead of getting dependent on external systems. She has been actively involved in development cooperation in Bangladesh since 1997, and over the years, she realized further projects in Asia, Africa, and Europe. She taught and teaches at various universities, including the University of Liechtenstein, ETH Zurich, TU Munich, and GSD Harvard. Anna's work has been widely recognized by numerous honors and exhibitions. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to GIZ, and hello to everyone around the world. So I'm sharing my screen. You see it? Good. Yes, as you already mentioned, architecture to me is a tool to improve lives. And I'm very well aware that also our profession contributes massively to climate change and to social injustice, because we often serve those who are in power and have the money and the richness. But we can also do better with our profession. I'm firmly convinced that we can build up communities while we build up structures, and we can do this in harmony with nature, and we can also foster a cultural diversity. So what you see here is the situation that we have all around the world. We are using for our construction materials that require a high amount of energy and that also produce a lot of carbon emissions. In that case, it's the fired clay, the bricks. But this is not the biggest polluter in the world. We have cement, especially, who is responsible for about 8% of the global warming. And then there comes, of course, the steel on top that requires another around 8%. And cement is currently used second most item in the world after water, which is really enormous. So we have to look to old wisdoms, how were we building in the past, and how are we able to put this into future. And if you could see my desk now, you would see right this, less concrete, more earth. This is what I'm kind of fighting for with my team, to see the material and value the material that we have underneath our feet. It's a common human notion that we don't look at the dirt, we look up to the sky, but we have a wonderful material just below our feet, and we can do beautiful structures with it and in harmony with nature. I had a great learning experience in Bangladesh when I was 19 years old. I was a development learner at an NGO, a Bangladeshi NGO called Deepshika. And what I learned there is that the most effective strategy for any sort of development is always to look at the resources readily available in your direct surrounding and also within yourself, in your network, and how to make the best out of those resources and not getting depending to external factors, because that in the end means resilience also. And I did my diploma in Austria, and for my diploma thesis I selected a school in that village. I kept coming back to that village every year. And then after 7 years, I started building a school, looking at the resources that were available direct underneath my feet, the mud, and then also the bamboo that is growing all around. And as energy resource, I was looking at people, because usually when we think of energy resources, we think of oil, we think of gas, we think of solar, wind, and so on, but we forget that every one of us is a source of energy too. And we are a growing resource with almost 8 billion people. And also, if this resource is not used, we create a social problem, and architecture can include a lot of people. So creating work with the project is always also center of all the projects that I'm doing. Yeah, the site was completely unplugged. This is the Métis School construction site, completely unplugged. We had only cows, water buffaloes, and people working, only 4 drilling machines that would recharge in the night. But other than that, it was completely unplugged without any electricity. And after 6 months of construction, the school looked like this. I had for the realization also Eike Roswak with me. But it's a really load-bearing earthen ground floor, and there's no cement added other than in the foundation, and then on top, the bamboo floor. And what I wanted to prove with that school is that, you cannot just build small, dark, mud huts with clay, but you can also build public structures and big structures with those kind of materials. I kept the school simple. It's tradition to sit on the ground. We kept this in the school, and then through the bolt hole that you see at the back wall, you come to the caves room. And the briefing of the client was to create a school where children want to go and every day are happy to enter the school, and kind of spreading the senses. And I just remember the spaces that I liked when I was a child, and I think everyone can relate to that sort of spaces. And then on top is more the treehouse kind of atmosphere where you have the overview of the village. The children all signed with their names, and they rightfully did so because they also helped building the school. So in the afternoon, in the mornings, they had normal classes. In the afternoons, they would come to the site. We had specifically two trained Montessori teachers with us who were just there to guide the children. And the beautiful thing is, working with clay, you can include so many people. We had people with disabilities working with us. We had, of course, men and women. We had elderly people who usually wouldn't have got jobs. And of course, the children. And you cannot do this with every material. There are material that are toxic. There are material, you need sophisticated tools. that could cause harm. But I think you all know how it feels to have your hands in the soil. It's a beautiful feeling to touch. And this inclusiveness enables a lot of participation, and that is a beautiful aspect also in working with this natural material. And I guess you can all imagine how the school looks like or how it feels when you stand in front of that school after 6 months of construction as a small girl or boy or a day laborer, and you remember, I did this school with nothing but the dirt underneath my feet and my muscles. That gives an incredible boost of confidence, first in yourself, in your own potentials, and also in the resources that you have available, and in the team. And usually what we are constantly being taught is that, we are not enough. We need to buy things in order to be something, in order to create something beautiful and special. But the biggest part of my work is always to kind of raise the trust. Also, of course, it's a personal thing, but of course also with all the communities that I'm working to raise the trust that everything is there is actually everything that we need to create something beautiful. And in terms of material, it's very important to raise the trust, because clay is having a very bad image in terms of durability. Although we have in every climate zone all around the world, we have earthen structures that are also very long lasting. So all that this material needs is good boots and a good hat, meaning a good foundation and a good hat, and then they can last a very long time. And the good thing is it's the only material you can take from the ground, recycle it as often as you want without any downcycling. So you have no loss of quality, which usually when we talk about recycling, we reduce the quality tremendously. Now here we always get the same quality, and you can easily repair it. Or if the building is not needed anymore, you just give it back to the ground it came from, and you can plant your garden on top. In terms of economics, it was nice that I was, of course, living also with the community, and every evening they get the salary. And then we went with the bicycle to the markets, and I could see how they spent their share of the building budget. And that budget was spent into buying vegetables from the neighbors, getting a new haircut, a new blouse at the tailor, and so on. And that was for me beautiful to see that a building budget had not just the effect of a building or the result as a building, but it was also a catalyst for local economic development. And that part made me most happy, because if I had built that school in steel or concrete, that money would have been exported and lost for that community. So when it comes to economics, my first and most important question is always, who gets the profit? Because maybe you can build a building even more cheap if you have like just corrugated iron and four pillars. But then again, who gets the money? And the money again is just making rich people more rich. And I think this question we have to keep in mind. And when I'm adding up at the end of my life as an architect, all the money that went through my hands, I want to be able to tell myself, hey, it ended with people, or it went to people that really needed it. So low cost is one thing, but more important is who gets the profit. Going to bamboo now, going to China. I'm not sure if anyone's there from China joining us today, but I was invited to do 3 hostels for Bamboo Biennale in Baozi, in a small village also. And the idea was of the organizers to prove that bamboo can be also modern material and not just an outdated one. And I happily participated, because I firmly believe that it's not a matter how old materials are, but it's a matter of our creative ability to use it in a modern language, in a modern architecture language, and also in a way that it really meets the needs and aspirations of the people. So the core is made out of rammed earth and stones, and then around is this expressive shape of bamboo. But of course, you could say, well, that's the reality, what you see now. It's not bamboo, it's not earth, it's not stones and wood and so on. Yeah, but a lot of people were living in those kind of materials before, and it's just a trend that happened recently. I mean, like in China particularly, it was a very fast trend between 2011 and 2013, a handful of years. China consumed more cement than the United States in the past century. So and this trend is not just in China, it's happening all around the world. And this is a trend we just cannot continue that way, because we will definitely wreck our planet. And it's not just that we need the energy to produce all these buildings, but we also need the electricity, the air conditioning, and so on, to keep the indoor climate comfortable. So there are better ways, and this has been done 500 years ago. So yes, it is possible to use Earth also in dense urban spaces. And what was possible 500 years ago must be possible today again, also with all the technologies and all the know-how that we have created and learned throughout the centuries. Where does the mud come from? So everywhere on this planet we have mud. That makes it so applicable both in the global south and the global north. And I really strictly am also that we do this also in Europe, and I'm building also in Europe with clay. So this is just from ICLEI, a graphic that shows the excavation material of the greater Parisian area around Paris. So there is massive excavation happening everywhere. You know, we're just thinking of subways, of underground parking, of canalization. So this is actually the material we can use for construction. Right now, we even pay for dumping it. And it's material that is given by nature for free and without any CO2. And we also find it even at spots where there's a big scarcity of materials. For example, in Kutupalong, one of the largest refugee camps in Bangladesh of the Rohingya right at the moment. So they're literally sitting on top of this building material and sitting in this plastic tents that have, of course, a horrible climate inside, the smell and everything, no acoustics, no fireproofness. You cannot go 2 stories and so on. So for me, I think clay is also in that circumstances really an extremely important material, because clay needs manpower and it's also there. So some have started it, but what's clearly lacking is still training and information how to build proper structures. Well, we all think it's a small niche, maybe building with Earth, but still 3 billion people worldwide are living in Earth, and structure is just not where we have our focus. It's not in the newspapers and in the magazines, but it's definitely not a niche. But to be able to keep it on that level or to scale it up, which we of course would love to do, is we need tools and technologies how to use it in modern ways. And how we use it in Europe, for example, is we prefabricate large blocks of rammed earth and are then stapled into multi-story buildings. Load bearing can also be hybrids with wood or other materials. And this is, for example, how you see a factory in Austria with Martin Rauch, Erden. So there's kind of a robot that is kind of ramming these large, long rammed earth walls. It's being cut into pieces and then stapled on the sides to all these multi-story buildings. So these are the blocks that I'm using currently in Germany. We're building for the Catholic Church a Center for Sustainability, which will open next year. So also here we are using it. And I think it's very important that we also focus on global strategies for sustainability, because I personally don't believe in a strategy that is only affordable for part of the world population, or we take the high tech and the global south is taking the low tech. No, we need a global approach. And the beautiful thing with Earth is we can use it in high tech modes of construction as well as in low tech modes of construction. The quality is always the same. We also need training and education. So this is, for example, a workshop that we did at Harvard University. And so we extended kind of the university into a mud structure. But of course, we also do trainings also in other parts in the world with low-tech modes of construction. But the strategy is always the same, using local materials, local energy sources, plus global knowledge. This, I think, is very important, that we don't that we have access to all this global information, and we can do this with our digital means and then apply it to the local means. We're hopping to Ghana, where I am in 3 days' time. I'm looking forward to be there. This was a master plan that I got from the Salesians of Don Bosco. And I was a bit sad because when I visited the village, it's so beautiful, still earthen architecture all around, and then this vivid kind of little cosmos with straight houses, round houses, beautiful liveliness. And then, you know, what we have transported from Europe is kind of the Roman military camp as a basis, as a master plan, this very effective structures lined up, but it's still there. So I took kind of this master plan and tried to bring in all these qualities that I found in that area in Ghana, to bring that storytelling, this family compound kind of atmospheres back in the campus. This is how it's going to be built at the moment. So we also use adobe blocks, which are more easy to construct for the people. But this is the Atacama technique, the most used in that area. We will also work and train in rammed earth soon. So this is the first school building. This is a very low-tech facade, but it's simulated with Transolar. So we know how much ventilation is in, how much natural light is in. So this building really works also without electricity. Yeah, the process is just as important as the outcome, that I firmly believe in. We can't build communities while we build up structures. And there is a lot to learn also from the Global South that we have to bring back also to Europe. And I want to see lots of beautiful regional solutions of building with local materials, because that's the beauty of our planet also, and of our building culture. So taking the old wisdom from the past, bringing it into the future with all the brilliant ideas from all around the world, that's my hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. This is incredibly encouraging and inspiring. I'm glad that it's a big challenge we have in front of us, but the ideas, the resources, the energies are there. You have shown us how beautiful this can be, how inclusive, how we can even make children more willing to visit, to go to schools and learn. So very, very inspiring contribution. Thank you so much. And I would like now to start with a little ice-breaking exercise before going to our panel. And I invite our kind audience to use this QR code or the link in the chat to access this platform, Slido. We have 3 quick questions for you, and this will help us go through the subsequent conversation. I will give you a few instants to connect. And you can see you have a first question to ask. Where are you joining from? We know we have an international audience, very much interested in knowing exactly where you are connecting from. So feel free to write the city where you are connecting from through this platform. The places, the cities will appear soon on the screen. I'm sure there are multiple coordinates, geographical coordinates involved in this. The location should appear momentarily. I can see that Ingrid Coetzee from ICLEI is connecting from Cape Town. I myself am connecting from Paris, and we were discussing with our colleagues before how climate change is affecting our cities as well. It's a very hot day in the city of Paris. Can we maybe start showing the slides, please? The results, is this possible? Wonderful, thank you so much. I can see Germany is #1 origin for our audience. That's not surprising. It was the case also last time, provided that this event is organized, has its main partner, of course, GIZ. Nairobi, 2nd place. Nairobi, very important cities for sustainable urban development, of course, for the energies that manifest there, but also for the presence, of course, of one other of our partners, UN Habitat. Berlin, Kenya, India, Brussels, Greece, Italy, Tbilisi, Peru, Windhoek, Uganda, Spain, Bogota, wonderful, Seattle, Mozambique, Kampala, Sevilla, the Netherlands, Calgary, Rome, Buenos Aires. This is really transcontinental, and I really am grateful to all of you who are connecting in not ideal time zones. Some of them woke up very early. I can see, for example, those in the Americas. Thank you so much for joining us in this early in the morning. It's really a pleasure. Thank you so much. All of you are very much welcome. We have a second quick question for you. And this is more of a knowledge question to see if you came prepared to our webinar. Investment needs for urban infrastructure at the global level are estimated at $4.5 to $5.4 trillion per year. Compared to traditional man-made approaches, how much cheaper are nature-based solutions for infrastructure? You have three options. We can see your choice. I think, well, we can see definitely most of you have selected 50%. Then we have 30% and 20%. Oh, we can see 30% is getting some more votes. I think that's somehow final. Oh, I can see 30% increasing its share. Let's see in a couple of seconds how this ends. Well, I think it's done. 49% of our audience has chosen 50% cheaper. Nature-based solutions are 50% cheaper, and this is correct. So well done, excellent. This is indeed 50% cheaper than traditional man-made approaches. So there is also an economic dimension to it. Good news, additional good news, and congratulations to those of you who knew or guessed correctly. And we have a quick final question, which will additionally help us in this panel we're about to start. What sector can nature-based solutions benefit? So this is, feel free to write the sector that you are more interested in and that you believe nature-based solutions are particularly valuable for. And our kind panelists will do their best to include these dimensions in their presentation and, of course, in the Q&A session that will follow up. Or we can see already transport, water, urban development, housing, a big percentage of votes for housing, construction, agriculture, climate adaptation, health and the agriculture as well. We can see, yes, and a lot of other topics, including infrastructure, tourism, decarbonization, design and architecture, river regeneration, planning law, design architecture, oh yes, job creation. So we can see that this is very transversal in, if I can say so, all the dimension of sustainable development. We will take into due consideration that the main 2 points that you are interested in the impact of nature-based solutions are housing and climate adaptation. Thank you so much to Media Company for the support, technical support, and to the public for answering so many interesting points. So now we can move to the panel on fostering inclusive nature-based solutions for low-income urban communities. And as mentioned before, we really have the privilege of having 3 leading voices on the topic at hand. from organizations that are deeply involved in nature-based solutions for low-income urban communities. We have Julie Greenwald. Julie is the Senior Climate Advisor at the Cities Alliance Secretariat, where she's responsible for leading the strategic direction of the organization's work on climate change, with a focus on informality and resilience. She has a vast experiences working on sustainable development with a focus on climate change, sustainable land use, and urban development in Africa and the Middle East. She holds a master's degree in urban planning from Columbia University and a BA in international relations, Spanish, and philosophy from Tulane University. She was a lead author of the UN Habitat Strategy paper, NBS to Build Climate Resilience in Informal Areas, and she co-authored 2 publications on NBS and national adaptation plans for IISD, and is co-chair of the Global Environmental Outlook for Cities. We also have the pleasure of having with us Ashali Bandari. Ashali is the Managing Director for Transitions Research People Urban Living Lab, POOL. Her work focuses on accelerating inclusive and transformative climate action in India's mid-sized, rapidly growing cities. In the past, she has pursued her interest in intersectionality of climate change, women's access to urban spaces, and informal livelihood through her work in cities in India and Bangladesh. She has a master's degree in city and regional planning from the School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania and a bachelor degree in geography from Middlebury College. At POOL, she has recently worked on a policy paper on integrating urban and reframing urban NBS in South Asian cities, and can share insight on their work on NBS that are aligned with local and community needs. And last but not least, Jacqueline Mweni Katu. Jacqueline is a senior environmental officer with the county government of Kisumu in Kenya. She has significant experience in integrating NBS into land use planning and had been involved in the Urban Natural Assets project that ICLEI Africa implemented in Kisumu City and County a few years ago, and it was focused on revitalizing urban natural assets and integrating natural-based solutions into land use planning for increased resilience. Now she is working with ICLEI on UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Programme, Generation Restoration Project, aiming to restore urban ecosystem. Jacqueline, allow me to start our roundtable with one question to you. In your experience, what is the key to successfully integrating nature-based solution into land use planning? And how do you go about that in Kisumu?
Thank you so much, Lawrence, and thank you all other participants. It is very important for you to be successful. They need to be a whole of society approach, an inclusive approach on all aspects, have all stakeholders come on board, let them feel part of the solution, and with that you can create a sustainable approach and an acceptability of what initiatives you have to put in place. So I think I can begin the presentation. So this is just a case study of what happened within Kisumu City with the support of ICLEI under the Urban Natural Assets project. And this is quite a hands-on experience of bringing fostering inclusive nature-based solutions with the low urban communities in the picture. Next slide. So these are just the facts and figures of Kisumu being the third largest city within the country, Kenya, the population size. We also are able to see the natural abundance of Kisumu City with regards to the rivers, which are also primary sources of water for the residents of Kisumu. Next slide. And of course, with urbanization comes issues of poor infrastructure, socioeconomic inequalities, and then this is exacerbated by issues of climate change. And this then transforms these areas within the urban settings to be risk-prone to areas of both societal and environmental challenges. So you can see from the pictures, next slide, the challenges that we currently experience due to unplanned structures and urbanization. Next slide. Those are flooding from our various important water sources. Next slide. So with the Urban Natural Assets Project with ICLEI, the UNA Rivers for Life, the main objective was to revitalize these urban natural assets and integrate NBS into land use planning for increased resilience. The main aim, together with this initiative with ICLEI, was to bring together communities, local and regional government, scientific researchers and urban planners to identify challenges and solutions to urban development. There was also a need to adopt and change and come up with new ways of thinking to approach and have inclusivity and ensure sustainability. Next slide, please. So how did we start this engagement? It was simple. We had a concept of a walk-in workshop. The walk-in workshop means we came together so that we can amplify our creativity and inspiration between the various identified participants, promote creation of innovative nature-based solutions and knowledge exchange. And with that, we're able to formalize strategic alliances. There was a focus on transfer of skills through horizontal learning and collective action from diverse stakeholders. The workshop also focused on specific points within the urban landscape, generating innovative solutions to local needs and challenges. This was to ensure we enhance adaptability to better meet the social, economic, and ecological needs of the area. And the two main pointers that we used was what we call urban tinkering and participatory photography. Well, urban tinkering, for those who would want to understand it more, is basically understanding your landscape and adjusting and molding to those needs and trying to meet and trying to understand how we can cater to those needs and ensure that we are able to come up with good solutions to mitigate the challenges we're experiencing. Next slide. So once the stakeholders were identified from diverse, that is the researchers, the communities actually affected, county officials, were able to come up with a few tinkering principles. They were around 5, which was 1, to integrate the gray, green, and blue infrastructure. The second was to fail safe or safe to fail. That means we have a diverse, having to be open, that it doesn't matter if we fail with a certain idea. We feel free to start an idea. If it doesn't work, we are able to re-strategize and come up with a better idea that can bring out better solutions. The third was to build on what we have on the ground. The fourth is nothing was useless. And the fifth was informality as an opportunity. So we were able to walk around and see what issues were plaguing these urban communities and how we can come up with solutions that can make them thrive within this ecosystem. Next slide. So as we walked around this major river, and in particular, one river which we call the River Uji, which is a major source of water in Kisumu County, certain issues were identified, issues of flooding, illegal waste dumping, insecurity, because children have to use this. There's a bridge across this river that they have to use, and it's quite densely covered. Hence, there were issues of insecurity, and also the vice of farming too close to the river. Next slide. So upon the urban tinkering and bringing communities together and they feeling that they are part of the solution, we had everyone was hands on deck. We can see everyone was hands on deck. So we can see the community came together, were able to form structures. Some were involved in waste management, recycling, composting. Others were able to try and recolonize the riverbanks, trying to move away the farming that was being done across the rivers and establish better structures that would enhance the community and bring out better livelihoods. Next slide. So with the support, this is how now the River Uji, a small section, looks like. We were able to restore a section of the river, encourage the recolonization of indigenous cover, and through the various cleanups the communities have learned to adopt to this kind of initiatives, there's also the introduction of native species within this river. Next slide. With regards to the urban farming and also the introduction of a form of incentive for the communities to feel part of the solution, we're able to establish nurseries whereby they can sell some of these seedlings and also be part of restoration of this endangered river ecosystem. So they were able to find the pros that were advantageous in working towards safeguarding the river and also having a livelihood that they can feel that they feel supported and they can see the importance of safeguarding the riverbanks. Next slide. So with the farming being moved away from the riverbanks, we're able to embark on more climate smart agriculture, establishment of community gardens, and no more farming near the riverbanks. Next slide. So one of the overarching successful outputs from this simple initiative that ICLEI really supported is that the city has now been identified to be part of the pilot cities under the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration with the UNEP Generation Restoration Project, and ICLEI will continue offering their technical support, and this project will be utilizing again NBS in restoration for people, nature, and climate. Next slide. In conclusion, NBS inclusivity is good. How is it good? It will offer employment opportunities and capacity building. These projects, once identified, will offer a safe net and ensure gender prioritization, inclusion. And if the community feels part of the solution, we also will ensure that they will play a good part in terms of bringing out and safeguarding the nature and also be part of the solution and not be seen like this is an opportunity for outsiders to come and bring solutions. So nature-based solutions, if inclusive, employment opportunities can be created, capacity building enhanced, ensure if there's integration of NBS in terms of social protection, where there's public works for cash or food, specialized training can be enhanced, and also close the gap in terms of employment. Next slide. So thank you so much for your listening and participation.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. This is very inspiring. It provides a sort of a road to follow to make this inclusive, impactful, and efficient. And also very interesting that you include many of the elements that have been raised as a topic of NBS impact. Thank you for doing that. We now move to Julie Greenwald. I would like to ask you, how can NBS be leveraged to build resilience and improve living conditions in informal areas? What is needed to implement this at scale? And I will ask Julie and of course all the other panelists to limit their contribution to 5 minutes so that we can leave the maximum amount of time to the Q&A after that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. So I won't do a presentation. I'm just going to speak about, well, yeah, a bit about my experience on nature-based solutions in low-income urban communities and some research that I've done and, yeah, aspects I've been involved with. I mean, I guess I'll just start by saying I think it's not difficult to justify why nature-based solutions seem like an excellent solution when we're dealing with the climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, and, you know, a continuing, I would say, inequality and development crisis, right? We have many people still living in dire poverty. And with the fact that all of these crises are sort of colliding at a time when urbanization is increasing, I think, you know, it's really demonstrated how critical urban areas are and working with low-income communities in urban areas to make sure that the solutions that we utilize to address the climate crisis also address the biodiversity crisis and also really involve, a respect for the people who are there, the people who are coming as these cities continue to grow, and that we really make sure that we prioritize, the needs of these communities, whether it's around housing or services. And again, I think, nature-based solutions kind of sounds like great. This can hit all of these boxes, and I think in many ways it is something that can be utilized. But I would also say that, it's never are these things perfect. And one of the things that we need to make sure we do is we understand kind of historically how we've gotten here and what are some of the current issues that have resulted in the pressures that we see on our ecosystems and biodiversity, as well as on pressures in terms of where land use development happens, where housing is a result. So yeah, I mean, also just say one thing I think it's good to keep in mind in terms of like terminology and the way we envision things. So I work quite a bit in Malawi, and the very first time I went to Lilongwe, I was sort of struck. I was like, oh, it's so green here. And I was so excited because I had come straight from Accra, which is a lovely city that I have a lot of love for, but maybe wouldn't be described as the greenest city. And when I said this to my colleague who works for the government, his response was, yes, it's the rainy season. And I realized actually that, for me, when I say, oh, it's very green here, I mean that there's a lot of vegetation, there's a lot of ecosystems, but sometimes the term green, can literally mean, oh, actually it's green in color as the result of the rainy season. And I think, it's important that our messaging doesn't get lost in the different terminology that gets used. And I think nature-based solutions is one of these things. It was called ecosystem-based adaptation for a while. Sometimes it's called green infrastructure. Sometimes as a result, we leave out the blue. And I think that's something that Jackie included in her presentation as well, is making sure that we're also thinking about water and water ecosystems. So yeah, there's a range of issues. In terms of, I'll just maybe highlight two things that I think are important. One is about getting things on the map. So I think, Lorenzo, you talked about the injustice of our climate emissions coming from places which aren't the ones that are suffering the most. I think there's also a lot of injustice in terms of where green space is, especially in cities in developing countries, as a result of colonialism, as a result of sort of limiting access to those places. And traditionally, you see a lot of kind of maps and urban planning that leaves off of the map both the natural environment as well as low-income housing and low-income communities. And so I think one of the really big things is making sure that spatial planning captures these hotspots. It captures the places where climate risk, whether it's from flooding or drought or heat, are the highest, and also captures where there is existing biodiversity and where potentially expansion of urban areas may compromise that biodiversity or may also result in more risk for those communities. So I think getting all of this on the map and really making sure that it's present and recognized is really important. And, for example, there's another example from Kenya about a mapping exercise that was done that identified different hotspots and along rivers and brought together 46 different organizations to collaborate. And I think that also shows just sometimes how many organizations need to be involved in order to have effective action. The other thing I'll say is also about local leadership and champions and how really critical that is as well. I think we're all well aware of that in a lot of ways, but I think making sure that people are capacitated, whether in order to be champions for the natural environment, but also to avoid any mistakes, right? So I think mistakes happen. There are issues sometimes about planting seasons and the rainy season, but the donor wants the project done in this time frame. And I think, making sure that local communities are really leading on these things and able to help plan like when the intervention should happen and identifying what are the most appropriate and indigenous species to utilize. Another thing that Jackie highlighted. I will just say 3 last things that I think are special considerations that, we need to keep in mind. One is there is a risk of maladaptation. It's very real, and we shouldn't be taking risks with low-income communities. So we need to make sure that we are properly identifying which climate risk we're building resilience about, and we really understand what is the existing situation. Another thing is about transferability of solutions. Unfortunately, a lot of the research and more of the practice comes from Europe and the US and China. This is changing when it comes to nature-based solutions, but we need to be really careful when we're talking about the transferring of these solutions into different systems, either because the urban environment or the natural environment can be very different. And then the last thing I just want to say is about valuation of nature. We all place different values on nature. Sometimes different voices are heard about like how we value nature. And I think we really need to be careful about whose value of nature is being sort of taken into consideration, and making sure that we're not repeating mistakes of the past in terms of injustice and, you know, prioritizing the values of nature of like external parties over those who are in those places. So that was my maybe just slightly longer than 5 minutes, but hopefully very quick summary of some of the good and the bad when it comes to nature-based solutions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Julie. And I think it's a very valuable contribution. You highlighted, of course, what motivates us, but also pointed to what we should avoid. Of course, we should not approach this topic unaware of the risks and the potential negative impacts of it. So thank you so much for raising our attention to this point. And now, last but not least, I would like to ask to Ashali, how can nature-based solutions be implemented in a truly inclusive way that integrates how low-income urban communities use urban nature and meets local needs?
Participants who are here today, and to our other speakers, I think what I'm going to say builds a lot on what has already been said, both by Jackie and by Julie. So I'd like to start really quickly, if that's okay, Lorenzo, to just take a second to talk about the context within which I work, so that this knowledge is also understood a little bit better. I run India's first urban living lab in an organization called Transitions Research. Our lab is called PUL. And we've been working on nature-based solutions for the last 4 years now. And we've been employing social science methods to understand how communities really use nature in the context of Indian cities, especially mid-sized cities. Nature is not just a park or a forest, but it's a space of culture, it's a space of livelihood, it's a space of food security. And recognizing that is really important for designing inclusive nature-based solutions. We've also had the opportunity to conduct capacity building and capacity strengthening with town planners and forest department officials to integrate this knowledge into their work. And last year, like you rightly mentioned, Lorenzo, we held a policy lab, kind of thinking about integrating equity and reframing nature-based solutions in the context of South Asian cities. So I will also be drawing on the experiences and lessons learned from this policy lab from my colleagues in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and Pakistan. So I just wanted to set that context. Now, coming to your question, how do you make nature-based solutions more inclusive? We need to kind of reframe them. Can I move to the next slide, please? Thank you. And I think there are two ways that we need to reframe nature-based solutions. The first is reframing them away from being a climate-only solution. Here we see that nature-based solutions are often touted as a solution to help achieve climate goals, especially mitigation goals by means of sequestration. But in our context, like Julie also mentioned, this hasn't been explored enough, and there are inherent trade-offs that we need to explore in order to make sure our nature-based solutions are inclusive. By framing nature-based solution as a climate-only solution, we prioritize the climate benefits over how people actually use nature. An example of this could be, to make this a little clearer, is in many of our cities, we have something called as peri-urban areas. These are the fringes of the city, parts of the city that are transitioning to be what is traditionally called urban or city context. A lot of these communities still are involved in rural livelihoods, including farming, right? But when you place the emphasis on climate and climate-only solutions, we pave the way for conversion, for example, of farming land to become an urban forest with species that can sequester a lot of carbon. right? Communities therefore lose access to livelihoods. They have challenges around food security. And of course, there are maladaptation challenges that also come out, also for biodiversity, right? The second way that we need to reframe urban nature to make them more inclusive is also building on what Julie said, thinking about the way we map nature, right? In the context of many of our South Asian cities, our planning legacies come from our colonial predecessors, right? We have master plans and development plans. These are statutory frameworks for land use planning. And in many of these, first of all, they happen once every 20 years. These cities are growing so fast. South Asia is one of the most rapidly urbanizing parts of the world. But we see that it's changing so fast that our 20-year planning timeframes can't keep up. But then on top of that, when you actually look at master plans, development plans, you find that you don't see any nuance in how we allocate nature. We just see open spaces, green spaces. There's nothing really to talk about, the wetlands and the sand dunes and the salt pans. And I'm talking about Panjim, the city that we are based in on the coast of India, the western coast of India, right? We have salt pans in our city, we have sand dunes in our cities, but they're not recognized when you look at the master plan. So how do we actually design nature-based solutions when we don't even understand or recognize the nature and diversity of our cities? Right? So that's one of the first things we need to do. We need to reframe nature. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. I just have a few examples here, right, to showcase what this really means. Some of these photos are from our partners from the Policy Lab, so thank you so much. But we see, for example, urban farming that's taking place. In the city of Panjim, we have a little photograph of some of the fishing communities and the fish they've caught that they're about to take to the market. And they use the sand dunes to park their boats and sort the fish. And then on the right, we see a Sarna Sthal in a city called Ranchi. It's in the eastern part of India. This is a really important cultural space for tribal communities who've long inhabited the city. It also serves as a social space because around the place of worship, there are places for communities, especially children, to play games, to play football, for people to socialize, which is much needed in our cities. Next slide, please. So, it's really important to give voice to these uses of nature. Restoring nature is very important, but we need to do so in a way that incorporates how people in our city are using nature. And so from this policy lab, from the work we've done, we've developed a toolkit, and I'm just going to highlight a few of the key principles on how to actually make our nature-based solutions inclusive. The first is around community engagement, around the design process of nature-based solutions, right? A lot of the times this is technocratic. You have experts sitting in government offices or consulting firms that are designing nature-based solutions. And if at all communities are involved, it's very passive, right? So ensuring active participation of communities in the entire phase, but especially at the get-go, is really important. There was an example in the city of Delhi, where along the banks of the Yamuna River that flows through the city, one of our partners at the Policy Lab highlighted how, I'm sorry for that noise, my power went out and that's my inverter that's kicked in. So in the city of Delhi along the Yamuna River, there are communities that have been farming there for decades. But according to the plan to rejuvenate the river, there was a plan to totally transform this space into a recreational space with cycling tracks, with walking paths, and that's great, but they didn't actually incorporate the use of communities and how they're farming there and how they have been farming there. So what this organization did, the Social Design Collaborative, they actually worked with communities to lead walks, and they allowed the government officials to come and see the farming and recognize it. Just because it's not on a map doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So this is one way, making sure community is actively involved. But similarly, making sure, is point number 2, we take a socio-ecological approach to design for the complexity of urban environments and ecosystems, right? Our ecosystems in cities are regional, right? You have a river that flows through a city, but its watershed is much larger than the city. You have all of these ecosystems that we need to understand the upstream and downstream impacts of nature-based solutions. And we also need to understand the ecological diversity, the biodiversity of us, what we're trying to restore, what we're trying to improve. So that's a really important part of things. Ensuring collaborative partnerships, so like where government is really overcapacitated. And one of the examples from Karachi was an example called Crops and Pots. And here we had governments, NGOs, and schools working together to do farming initiatives, training kids on how to farm, ensuring they could address food security, and also trying to cool the schools down by implementing and installing more green space. So finding those partnerships is important. And just very quickly to wrap up, prioritizing gender equity and social inclusion. Our cities are, have a lot of challenges about gender, what gender equality and gender equity looks like in the Western context, in the South Asian context is very different. So ensuring that we're including people of all genders in the process, of all class, all castes, all creeds is really important to ensure our solutions can be inclusive. Thank you, Samir.
Thank you very much, Ashali, for these messages about the importance of integrating urban needs, the wide array of social and ecological needs that the NBS can address jointly, and of course the importance of capacity development and collaborative knowledge exchange that is an endeavor we are trying, of course, to contribute to. Many thanks to our three panelists, and congratulations for the inspiring activities that you are developing. Thank you for sharing your methodologies, your insight, your experiences with us. We now have the unique opportunity to ask you questions. You can find the link to ask questions in the chat. Also, you can use, if you prefer, the QR code with your smartphone, the QR code on the screen. And this is a participatory Q&A session. You are allowed not only to ask questions, but also to vote for the questions that you consider more interesting to be answered. And we will follow the order of the approval of these questions, how many people are interested in a question. We will give them priority to the most approved questions then. I would like also to invite our kind audience to identify the panelists that you would like to ask the question to, if a question is specific to one experience, to one context, for example. And I will now, while I leave you the floor, leave you the time to write your questions, I would maybe start with a very quick questions to the three of you. Just if you can say a very quick word about the way, an element that has been already touched by some of you, how can nature-based solutions be beneficial in increasing the economic dynamism and the job creation in the different areas? Just in a nutshell, 1 minute to kickstart this Q&A. Maybe we can start with Jackie, then Julie, and Ashali.
So if we can engage short-term public works for cash or food into NBS, it can be really a life changer for communities and also to accept it. At the same time, if we extend this specialized training, because you find that some NBS interventions are quite advanced in terms of knowledge. So if we can offer ideas, say, of specialized training, this can also help to bridge the gap in terms of employment and also give them a cutting edge to join into that employment opportunity. And also in terms of design, if we have gender designs when having nature-based solutions being put in place, it can really bring about economic development and also social acceptability.
Thank you, Jackie. Please, Julie.
Great. So if I'm being honest, I have some hesitancy about whether we should be looking towards NBS for economic development. Certainly if communities prioritize this and prioritize job creation, but I do think sometimes we we overpromise that NBS will also be able to deliver on long-term job creation, or that it'll also be able to deliver on economic development. And I think, I understand why, but like this kind of economic valuation, I also think can be a little bit risky. So, you know, I think it should be led by if this is a priority for communities, but I also think we should be cautious about seeing NBS as this sort of panacea to solve all of these problems, including economic development, because it may not be realistic, and there may be a lot of other values that can't be economically determined from utilizing NBS.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's very important to add this reframing element. Thank you for that. And Ashali.
Thanks for the question. I think when we think about economics of, the possibility of nature-based solutions to provide livelihoods, it's really important to consider the livelihoods that already exist in nature. I definitely think, especially in the context where I've worked, nature-based solutions such as mangrove restorations, for example, in Panjim, that include a diversity of species. I wouldn't say that it's a massive livelihood generator, but there are flowers that are used for festivals. There are fruits that are able to be consumed. So can we supplement livelihoods? Right? I don't know if we can totally create new economies around them, but can we supplement livelihoods by considering ecological diversity and the benefits that can be provided by that? And similarly, when we design our nature-based solutions, I think food is a big one in our context, right? Urban farming, very urban farming is huge. Making sure that we're not taking that livelihood away, fishing livelihoods away when we're designing nature-based solutions is really important.
Thank you very much, Ashali. And I can see there are a lot of very interesting questions. So thank you to the public for asking them and, of course, voting them. I see that the most voted question, and that I would like to ask Jackie if you would like to answer it, is indigenous communities have traditional knowledge that most of the time is not included in policy making, even when they are key actors. How do we include their traditional knowledge to build infrastructure and enhance nature-based solutions?
Thank you so much. This is quite an informative question, and this was very key during the implementation of the Urban Natural Assets Rivers for Life in Kisumu. We came with our own perspective as the technocrats. We had these ideas Julie was talking about. We came with our own solutions with regards to issues with regards to that river. But when we got these stakeholders, people with indigenous knowledge, and we had the walk-in workshop, we were able to get a thorough insight of what ails these communities, what indeed they wanted so that they can accept whatever initiatives we had in place. So yes, it is possible to include these indigenous communities. They can bring out the information in a lay kind of information, and then now we try and formulate it such that we can include it in terms of policy. They do have the ideas, they do have the information, so we should include them. And once we include them, there's a lot of acceptability, there's a lot of sustainability in whatever initiative you put in place. So this, going back to our initiative, the walk-in workshop, we decided we are no longer going to sit in a boardroom and decide this is what approach we are giving. We went to the community and we had a 3-day walk-in, listening to them, getting to know their challenges, and asking, how can we improve, or how can we approach this tragedy, and how can we work towards it? So it is very important to have these communities in place to ensure that we build better infrastructure and enhance NBS.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Very, very interesting question. Very, very interesting answer. I know all of you would like to answer all of questions, but I'll do my best to alternate with the questions so that most of them will be able to receive at least one feedback. There is a very interesting question from an anonymous member of the audience. Have you received any pushback from the communities in which you work? If yes, is it just about resistance to change, or are there other unique issues to be considered? I would like to ask this question to Ashali.
Sure, thanks. That's a really interesting question. I think when we think about trade-offs, we rarely think about pushback from communities. In the case of Sri Lanka, the city of Colombo is basically built on a wetland, right? If you go there, you'll see, and the fringes of the city still have some of their wetlands intact, but they're rapidly expanding. And when, some efforts were made in Colombo to try and restore these wetlands, there are, of course, communities living there. They faced a lot of pushback because they were worried about biodiversity coming in, right? And there were certain species, I'm trying to remember, fishing cats specifically, there might have been a few more, but the fishing cat is an endangered species in Sri Lanka. And there was a bit of a pushback if you restore these wetlands, even if you build paths for us, we're going to see more attacks on our poultry, on our animals from these fishing cats, right? And there was a lot of fear that was part of the process. And so I think it's really important to think about behavior change and awareness, right? Because these communities obviously had to prioritize their livelihoods, their poultry for farming, but we also need to think about biodiversity when we think about nature-based solutions. It's not only about people, but there are a lot of other species involved. So I think behavior change is really important. Awareness generation. What are the unique tools to do that? Right? Getting, maybe if they're youth, WhatsApp and Instagram and social media are really interesting platforms to leverage to talk about these issues, to talk about urban nature, to talk about biodiversity, right? If they're people who are a bit older, if they're people who may not be completely literate, focus group discussions, community meetings might be important for us. So it's really important to cater your messaging to your audience and figure out the best way to raise awareness. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Ashali. There are other very interesting questions. I would like to ask one to Julie. One of them you have already mostly already answered with my question. So allow me to ask you, are there any specific funding mechanisms or financial models that can support the development and maintenance of nature-based solutions in economically disadvantaged communities?
Sure. Well, this is not the easiest question, but I think, there are, well, I'll start at the big level, right? I mean, there are these large climate funds, right? Like the Green Climate Fund and the JEF and the Adaptation Fund, and all of these can be utilized for nature-based solutions. But there's certainly an access issue here, and I don't want to pretend like these are easy to access and to get the funding down to the local level. And this is certainly, I think, a big challenge. And they also take time, right? These are not, I worked on a JEF proposal in Nigeria. I started on 8 years ago, and they're just seeing the funding now, right? So, in communities, especially if you're doing these inclusive approaches where you're going in, you're having these discussions, you're getting people excited about it, and then the momentum stops for a really long time, right? Because of the sort of mismatch in scale of time. And I think that can be really challenging for keeping up the interest and the momentum. There are some smaller funds that I think, can be somewhat easier to access. There's one with IUCN and UNEP, which I can't think of the exact name right now. I think it's the EBA fund. That is somewhat more accessible. JEF also has a small grants program. And again, I think that's something that primarily was accessed by a lot of rural communities for a really long time. And there is starting to be more of a reorientation from the JEF on sustainable cities. And I think that isn't sort of providing an opportunity. But maybe the most interesting one I would say, which won't claim to be an expert on, is Freetown is Treetown. So this has been a massive effort by the government in Sierra Leone. It's been a partnership that a city government has worked with, the national government has worked with international organizations, and has worked with private donors on tree planting. And what I do know about that is that there is people can utilize their phones when they plant a tree. They can take pictures of it. There's a payment method that goes through the phone. So it uses these mobile money apps in order to compensate people for, not only the planting of trees, but also caring for the trees afterwards, because we know a lot of times tree planting efforts can fail because the maintenance is not there. And so I'm not an expert on this program, but I think it is a really great example of like the city government and private sector coming together and then finding ways to ensure that local communities are compensated directly for the efforts they make. And I think more things like that really, aren't just about large organizations accessing funds from large funds, but really on the ground makes a huge difference. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Julie. There is a question specifically for Jacqueline about a part of your presentation that was considered particularly interesting. So if you can elaborate, please, on the fail safe to fail approach. Do you have example of failings and how you could make use of that for the project?
Thank you. Well, the safe to fail approach basically is just not being afraid to change things and to experiment with new ideas. That's basically just the concept in large. So this initiative was whereby we were trying initiatives, could be in managing of the waste along the river, coming up with solutions. If it doesn't work, we change. So it's an open kind of approach whereby you look at the kind of disturbance, you look at the kind of change that you're exposed to and come up with a solution. I hope I've answered the question.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And I would like to ask a question to both Ashali and Julie. Very interesting question from Milagros Barki. What are the barriers to scaling up nature-based solutions from pilot projects to citywide initiative in low-income urban areas? Maybe we start with Ashali and then Julie. Ashali, I think you're muted.
Yeah, my computer froze, so I didn't know if you called on me or Julie.
It
But
works
I'm
perfectly.
back. Yeah, I'm off mute. I'm happy to go first, unless Julie would like to. No, I'll go ahead. I'm off the floor. Sorry about that. But yes, the question is, what are the barriers to scaling up nature? I think there are a couple. My experience of doing pilot projects, it's a lot of work to get buy-in from the community as well, right? It is long-term efforts. It is time spent. It is a lot of work to incorporate their inside needs for urban nature and only what, for example, that's want right out of the solution. So, for example, in the city of Mumbai, in Dharavi, which is one of the largest slums, a project, to cool it down, the community was more concerned about air pollution, right? So finding species to plant in the community that have air pollution benefits was really important. Now, this will be contextual and different in every settlement you go to across cities. So that community outreach, understanding local challenges, it's a lot of effort. And so finding the resources, the team that's going to do that outreach, the team that's going to do that work is really important. And I also think financing is because you need, trained technicians, people who are experts on community outreach, experts on ecologists, landscape architects. And then of course there's financing, whatever the restoration or implementation of the project is. So I think resources and community outreach.
Thank you very much, Ashali. Julie.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a great question. I last week was in a session with some young leaders from a variety of African countries, and we were talking about sort of why we think cities have developed in the way they have. Like, why are we in this current place that we are in? And one of the things one of the participants brought up is about how politicians a lot of times want to leave their mark. And so you have a lot of like phase one of some project, but it never gets to phase two, right? Because there's a political change. And I mean, I've seen, like highways that go nowhere, right? Because it was a phase 1 and phase 2 just never happened, which is a slightly different question from going from pilot projects to, but I think it's related in that a lot of times there's this momentum behind the initial phase of something, and there's a lot of excitement because it's something new, but then, you know, the kind of the sustainability, and that word gets slightly overused, but you know, the actual like ensuring that this sustains over time, the will is not there. And I think, you know, that's, you know, in some ways that's why it's really critical that the community really wants this and is on board with it, so the whims of changes in politicians doesn't limit the progress. I also think, if I'm being honest, I think this is very much on international organizations and international donors as well, because sometimes they prefer to see a new project and not a continuation or an expansion of projects. They want to see the new tool get used. They want to see, you know, innovative approach instead of picking up on what's working. Other times I think it's just a lack of awareness that this is happening, right? And so I think, you know, and actually in the publication that I did with UN Habitat, we did look at scale, and basically there's a mismatch. Non-urban NBS tends to happen at landscape scale. Urban NBS tends to happen at neighborhood scale. So you have this huge difference in terms of what you're talking about with scale. And some of that has to do with fragmented natural environments, but a lot of it has to do with kind of the way the planning happens in cities. And so I think, you know, part of it is also maybe when we're devising the pilot project, we need to look more at this landscape scale in the first instance, and so that we're not isolating the interventions just to a neighborhood, but we're looking more broadly and holistically across the urban, the peri-urban, and through to the rural areas. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Julie. We are fortunately already approaching the end of our webinar, and I would like to ask our kind panelists to do something quite difficult, to really sum up a key message, a key takeaway they will bring with them from this conversation in 1 minute, no more than 1 minute. That's the additional challenge. And I would like to start with Jackie, please. I think Jackie is having a little trouble turning on the microphone. Maybe we can start with Ashali, and we circle back to Jackie in an instant.
First of all, thanks to everyone. This has been a really great webinar. I feel like I've learned so much from our distinguished team panelists, and from Anna, her case study. So thanks so much. I think for me, one of the big takeaways, I don't want to say it's the only takeaway, but one of them is definitely about being really contextual in what you do, right? And not trying to replicate approaches that come from other places. And this started when, you know, Anna was talking a lot about the soil and building schools that work for the local context. Maybe in the case, she was like, it has to work without electricity, for example, right? So designing the local materials for the local context. And then Jackie also talked about similar things when she talked about her tinkering and her walks and addressing local challenges, right? When you actually can do designing nature-based solutions. So I think it's really, I think for me, context, local, and community are the 3 key pillars of inclusive nature-based solutions. And so that's kind of, I'll keep it really sweet and short. I think nature-based solutions have to happen. And when we're designing projects, when we're incorporating international donors and funders, you know, that needs to be a key pillar of project design. I don't think it really is. So
thank you very much, Ashali. Jackie, please, 1 minute or less, please.
You can hear me now? Okay, thank you. My greatest takeaway from NBS and being part of trying to implement a few projects in Kisumu with regards to NBS is all hands on deck. Everyone's input from the lowest to the one on top, everyone's decision and information is important. For NBS to be successful, everyone should play a participatory role. Everyone's information or whatever they give should be taken with as much consideration and importance. For NBS to also be successful, everyone should remove their mindset that NBS is one size fits all. NBS is fluid, NBS is not transferable. You have to adapt and be willing to change with regards to whatever challenges you're facing. And also, one takeaway I've also appreciated is when Anna really and Julie also talked about the risk of maladaptation, people not understanding exactly what is NBS and trying to come up with different ideas with regards to NBS. So if we are to move and ensure that NBS is successful, there should be an inclusive approach, there should be an informative approach, and eventually we'll see a good success with regards to NBS, especially for the vulnerable communities.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And last but not least, Julie.
Sure. So I don't write down a lot by nature, but I wrote down 2 things when Jackie was presenting. I think it was she had a summary of 4 things they learned in the community, and number 3 was nothing is useless. I love that. And number 4 was informality is an opportunity. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to over romanticize nature, and I don't want to sort of be like, oh, each piece of nature is beautiful and useful and everything. But, small efforts do make a huge difference. And I think, a lot of this, we were talking about mapping, and, a lot of times things get coded as like vacant land when there's actually people on it and there's actually nature on it, which doesn't make it perfect. And there's a lot of issues with degradation, right? We didn't really touch on this, but a lot of, unfortunately, our natural environment is degraded in urban areas, but it's not useless. It's never useless. And I think like that's a huge takeaway. And that's also a mindset shift, right? And we need to make sure that, we look at the opportunities that are in the informal areas, whether it's nature that's sort of informally found a place to thrive, or whether it's economy, or whether it's communities. And I think, that those 2 pieces together are something I'll definitely take forward. So thanks everyone.
Thank you very much, Julie, and thanks, in fact, to all of you kind panelists for this encouraging session. I think we are energized. We want to go ahead. We learn a lot about the possibilities, but also the risks, the way to go, the things to avoid. And definitely there is a lot of energy, a lot of wish for collaboration, context-specific adaptation, inclusivity, and transversality of our action. So thank you so much for these thought-provoking contributions. Indeed, our aim is to continue the conversation after this webinar. And we are excited to announce an opportunity to continue this exchange in between and in addition to the online sessions of the webinar series. This was, by the way, asked for by participants on our survey after the last session. Therefore, we would like to invite everyone to join the Sustainable Urban Development Community Group on Capacity for Dev platform. This is a knowledge-sharing platform created by the European Commission's Directorate General for International Partnership to connect development professionals around the world. The group is a space to share interesting practices, examples, tools, and events. Feel free to post your thoughts and activities. We will do the same. And finally, we cordially invite you to join us in our next session, Changing Cities for the Better from the Bottom Up, scheduled for August the 22nd at 1 p.m. Central European Summertime, organized with Slum Dwellers International. The session will be part of the Daring Cities 2024 virtual forum organized by ICLEI from August to October. You can find more information at the link in the chat. We certainly hope to see you back. Thank you all for your participation. Goodbye and take care.